Добрый день, уважаемые участники вебинара. Меня зовут Ольга Лукьянова, и я руководитель кураторской службы факультетов дизайна и дизайна интерьера в Высшей школе «Среда, обучения». И перед тем, как начать, я хочу поздравить вас, неравнодушных к новой информации, наших прекрасных слушателей, с Днем знаний, с 1 сентября. Это огромная честь читать перед вами лекцию, именно перед вами неравнодушных к новой информации, к новым знаниям, к бесконечному прокачиванию себя людям. И к теме. Сегодня мы продолжаем нашу серию лекций «Встреч вне границ». И это 9-я лекция по направлению дизайна интерьеров, уже 9-я неделя подряд. Встречи по направлению дизайна интерьеров у нас проходят по средам в 19 или 20:00, либо в 20:30. Следите за расписанием на нашем сайте. А также встречи проходят по направлению психологии по вторникам, по направлению дизайна по четвергам. Напоминаю, что все записи лекций доступны на нашем YouTube-канале с оригинальной озвучкой и переводом. Запись текущей лекции будет выложена уже завтра. О спикере. Сегодняшняя тема посвящена процессу совместному проектированию пространств, и о ней расскажет наш спикер Милагрос Зингони. Милагрос работает в университете Теннесси в качестве директора школы архитектуры. В течение 9 лет она преподавала в области архитектуры и городского дизайна, а затем присоединилась к программе дизайна интерьеров, где она создала и разработала степень магистра в области архитектуры и интерьера. Немножко про регламент. Как всегда, 1,5 часа. Примерно час будет лекция от нашей прекрасной Милагрос, и полчаса – это серия вопросов и ответов. Вы задаете на протяжении всей лекции вопросы в чат, и в конце лекции тоже, а я задаю их Милагрос, и на самые классные она отвечает. На этом все. Также вы можете еще задавать вопросы о поступлении к нам в сентябрьский набор на программу дизайна интерьеров, и мы с удовольствием вам ответим на них в чате. И все. На этом моя вступительная речь заканчивается. Я передаю слово Милагрос. Милагрос, здравствуйте.
Thank you, and привет, Beth. I'm gonna share my screen now. Can you see it? Excellent. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you and to share the work that I have been doing for the last 17 years. I am Milagros Zingoni. I am now an associate professor and director of the School of Interior Architecture at the University of Tennessee. I am fairly new in the University of Tennessee. Before this, I was for 17 years at Arizona State University, where I taught for 9 years in architecture and urban design. And then I moved to create the new Masters of Interiors 8 years ago to interior design and interior architecture. So today the presentation is going to be about collaboration to the power of collaboration, and why design matters, and why bringing the community together through participatory design matters, right? If you look at the world right now, it seems like it's upside down. We are living in a moment of social distress where it seems like if we are in disagreement, we are against each other. We have a generation of young adults who are very, very well connected virtually through our phones, but they are not as much connected as previous generations emotionally to their peers and their other generations. The world is in distress with fires across the globe, droughts, refugees trying to flee countries where they don't feel safe. And on top of all this, COVID came and have kind of created the last drop of a full glass, right? So why design? I believe that design can change the world. And I believe that in order to educate our students through design, one of the ways of doing it is through participatory design. How to teach empathy in our students' own capacity to collaborate with others, and why teaching design build studios. So at the very beginning, I'm going to go through a reflection of my years teaching and what I have changed as an educator in architecture and interior design, to share with you what I'm doing right now. So we could all agree that our disciplines of design, regardless the scale, if you are looking at landscape architecture, industrial design, or interior design, or even graphic design, is a reflective practice, right? It's a dialogue of thinking in which we become more skillful with each iteration. And this notion of reflection, of being a reflective practitioner is important because 70% of the jobs that our kids will do, they don't exist today. So we need to instill in our students the ability not only to design for today's problems, but to be problem seekers and problem frameworks, right? If you look at evolution, we have really evolved especially in the last 100 years, right? Yet the way that we teach continues to be exactly the same as the post-industrial revolution. So the way that I look at design education is, I use this as my favorite example. If I were to ask any of you to think about a chair, probably you would think about an object more or less similar to the object drawn on the left. It's a place where you can rest your butt. You can put your butt. It has legs and it has a rest. What if I were to tell you that the piece of fabric that is around the Indian of Paraguay, that's his chair, right? In order to understand that that's his chair, we need to first understand him, right? First, he's nomadic. He moves from one place to the other one, depending the seasons, right? And he wouldn't be able to afford our chair. And on one side, we have understanding him as an empathetic response. But on the other side, we have what is a chair, right? This reflective practice of what is the purpose of this chair, right? And when we think that a chair serves the purpose of having the body in a resting position, right? That the DNA of the chair is to rest the body. When we have this understanding of the essence of the chair, and we have the understanding of the native from Paraguay, then it makes sense that his piece of fabric is his chair, because it's allowing him to have his body in a resting position, yet considering all the personal things that are associated with him, like his nomadic characteristics or the means to afford a regular chair, right? When 13 years ago, I developed something that is called Edit Studios. I'm gonna cover what it means edit in a second. But when we ask about, we say, okay, the world has evolved, right? Education has not. We are also asking employers to ask about what is it that they want when they are hiring our students. And what is super fascinated that we all are teaching you to know Revit and Rhino and Grasshopper and AutoCAD and Adobe suites, yet the employers are asking for a whole different set of skills, right? In a couple of different surveys done in the last 10 years, they are looking for reliability, risk-taking, ability to work under pressure, ability to plan and think strategically, and collaboration continues to be the one constant that is across all different surveys, right? Why collaboration? Well, there is a correlation between collaboration and innovation and empathic response, but also there is a correlation between collaboration and your ability to improve creativity. So because I am a reflective practitioner and I reflect from when I was a student to when I started being an educator to now 17 years later, I have a couple of crises, right? My first crisis was when I was a student and I graduated as an architect. I didn't know how to put together a budget, and I really was not that great at really making the joinery, the detailing of how two pieces of the building will come together, right? But I also started to reconcile when I moved. I am, at this point, probably you realize that I have an accent. I am originate from Argentina. And when I moved to the US as an educator, I started to question how we reconcile multiple perspectives, right? There is a culture that comes with me, that is how I grew up and how I learn and how I relate to my peers and to my professors. And then when I moved to the US, the culture was different, right? So this first notion of reconciling multiple perspectives, it started from a cultural background, but then through time and with a lot of reflection, I was able to understand that the multiple perspectives needed to cover other stakeholders, right? Then how do we reconcile empathy and designing for everyone? Are we really doing what the community needs, right? And who is representing the community at the table? And my last question was about diversity in the profession of architecture and interiors. Back in the days when I graduated from architecture 20-something years ago, The ratio was like 1 female every 12 males. Now in interiors, we have almost the same ratio, but backwards, right? We have more female students than males. So to me, there is something that we are telling the students that is gender associated, that maybe there is an opportunity for improvement. And these kind of reflections, right, put my reflections into actions, and with critical thinking is when I develop this edit. One of the things that we need to do in order to make design available, accessible to others is bringing what this kind of demystify what an architect or what an interior designer does, right? We live in a moment that is all about only the aesthetics, but as designers, we are really shaping experiences and opportunities for everyone that is going to be using our spaces, right? And also, how do we get the buy-in from members in the community? The idea is that we get the the theory, and we put it together with the praxis, and we develop what is called praxis, right? As a means to designing with others instead of for others through these community engagements. So the first community engagement project design build that I did was a long time ago, and we were tasked with designing a playground for a kindergarten. And basically we went and observed the kids. We interview them. Here they are very small, but these are the drawings of the kids. We asked them to design their favorite playgrounds. You can imagine they were 3, 4, and 5 years old. Their drawings were not great, but we started to ask them, and we would annotate where were all these elements that they were considering from these playgrounds. And through observing them and through the interaction with the kids, we designed and fabricated the playground for the community. As time moved by, I work on different projects with community partners. This is one in a place that is 40 minutes away from the university in Arizona. The community asked, can you help? And I was like, yes, of course, what do you need? We don't know. So we would organize these community gatherings in an empty lot in the community, and we will have over 200 members of the community participated on them. Another example is working with architecture students and the School of Masonry. So the adults that you see over here, they are adult men who are planning going to get the skills to work on construction. And the young students that you see, they are my students working together, learning to pour foundations, to fold the rebar, to build a wall. And this is when we built the first ADA planter for people in wheelchairs for a community garden in Arizona. So I believe that interiors should serve the public good. We need to train the students to work in different contexts, engage in the community, developing empathy, and learning in different ways, right? And this notion of learning is exploring active explorations with different contexts, again, collaborating with one another in interdisciplinary ways, developing empathy through these community engaged projects that eventually they all serve the public good. The work that I have been doing with communities and with design builds have been lately recognized with national awards from the Interior Design Educators Council, that is all the professors in interiors recognizing the best educator of the year, through the American Institute of Architects, that is the professional organization that is saying, this is the professor that is producing the best students, and by what I would say that is the most meaningful recognition of this type of work in design studios, that is identified by my students as one of the top 10 most admired educators in the country. So today I want to show you one of these projects, right? I cannot show you glimpses, a little bit of many ones, but I want to show you in depth one of them. This is a project done 2 years ago, where we work with graduate students from interior architecture, with undergraduate students. They were third year in industrial design. We work with 120 kids from a public school, and we work with our grantor, that is the funding agency that gave us the funding to build, and with the design shop and the School of Art, Media, and Engineering. Something that is important to mention is like most of the work that I have done, it has been always with underserved communities. And by underserved communities are usually communities that they are unheard, that they are not in the design process, they are not in the planning process or in the decision-making process. So this particular public school is a Title I school. Title I schools are schools where the 75% of the kids or more qualify for free or reduced lunch, right? So if you need to understand this in a different way, at least 75% of the kids are below poverty standards and the school needs to provide them a free lunch. So it was a very complex project from the point of view that it was a design build that at the end of the day, we need to design an installation. It was transdisciplinary because we have students from interior architecture and industrial design. It was an edit studio. An edit is this notion of engaging the community, designing, impacting the community, and transforming it, right? And it was vertical because we have graduate students and undergraduate students working together. So design build studios are very well known in architecture, but they are usually the exception in interiors, right? There is a lot of literature that kind of supports that these type of experiences for students serve as a base for the synthesis, integration, and transformation of knowledge through teaching and project execution, right? It is notion of the theory and the practice, right? When we tell the students, you will have to build whatever you design, then they are applying all the theory that they have from other courses and what they have from their own design studio, right? With design build studios, we also develop hard skills and soft skills. And as I mentioned before, they are very well studied for 50 years in architecture. In interior design, there was an effort to rebrand the concept to build to learn. And build to learn didn't acknowledge full-scale installations. They were acknowledging most of the time model making, right? And in part, the author of this build to learn approach, she believed that in interiors we couldn't design full scale because most of the students were women and most women didn't work with power tools. That's her, that's not me. I am someone who has, for my first Mother's Day 16 years ago, and asked for, as a gift, a circular saw. I have been working with power tools since I was in high school. So this is the notion of this edit studio where we engage, design, implement, and transform the community that we engage with, right? So we did is that we have the hypothesis that we will have the physical space, the artifacts, and the verbal and nonverbal communication. And these three objects together will develop or force the students to collaborate with one another, right? And this collaboration will happen across multiple contexts because not only that the students need to collaborate among our own team, but they need to collaborate with all these other partners that I showed you in the previous slides, right? And the collaboration will have to go through this edit design build studio. So the studio brief, when we did this project, at the very beginning, this type of projects feels a little bit like a blind leading a blind, because we have 120 kids that they are like, what do we do? Or I want to design, and we have our students asking exactly the same questions. So at the very beginning, what we do is developing this kind of metaphor of the bees and the beehive, saying, okay, imagine that we will have to develop a space where we are going to enable other smaller pieces to be, right? And the bigger space was the responsibility of the interior architecture students, and the little spaces, or the bees in this case, would be the collaboration with the industrial design students, but looking at them as if it were one ecosystem, right? The collaboration in design practice differs from all the other type of collaborations that most of the books are written about, right? In a studio, this communication and collaboration between co-designers is multimodal, right? Multisensorial and ubiquitous. That means that you are showing an image, that you are using your hands, that you are pointing at a model or even breaking a model altogether, right? And it touches the artistic, emotional, and experiential side of the students. The collaboration brings awareness to the team, right? Sometimes when we cross our arms or when we grab our head, it's like we are saying with our body that we disagree, maybe with an idea that is being discussed. It brings the coordinative artifacts, that is the models and the graphics and everything that we try to coordinate to use as a supporting of our communication and the design studio space. And as I mentioned before, all these elements of the collaboration combined improves the creativity. So all the projects that I have done with Edit Design Build Studios, they are organized in 4 periods. The first in 3 periods. Every period has 4 weeks. The first 4 weeks, we are working with the kids at the school. The next 4 weeks, we are designing, and the next 4 weeks, we are fabricating. This is where the semester ends, and then usually the exhibit stays in a museum or in a public realm or in another place for another 4 months. But the semester is usually 12 weeks with 4 weeks, 4 weeks, and 4 weeks between the engagement with the community, in this case, the kids, the design process, that is 4 weeks designing the project, and the fabrication of the project. And usually how I organize the studio is one of the biggest challenges, especially when we're working with larger groups, is to make every student accountable. So we develop roles within the studio, and these roles is they identify, they brainstorm all the different aspects that we need to cover from the project. And then what the students are asked to do is to go and draft a position as if you were to hire someone. So if the student wants to be the project manager, or they want to be the liaison with the city and the public art office, how would they write the call to hire someone if they were to be working in an office and hiring someone? And what it does is like they realize all the requirement skills that the position will require and the responsibility. And then after the students draft these imaginary positions, then they have the opportunity to step down and say, oh no, this is a lot more than I thought that I wanted to do. I want to change to another role, or this is too little and I want to have a role that is much more responsible than the one that I chose at the very beginning. So this notion of developing the roles helps a lot to develop accountability, right? And then one of the things that we do at the very beginning is like we move our studio space a lot to support this notion of collaboration within our group. And parallel to this, we work with the ID students that they have the same timeline, but at the very beginning, they need to do some brainstorming by themselves before they could interact with others. So when we go to the school and we work with these kids for the first 4 weeks, usually the first time that we go, we just play with them. There are a couple of games that they are all peer review published processes that basically what it does is like it reduces the structures of power. When we work with vulnerable populations, they tend to look at us professors as we come from the Olympus, right? As gods. Then they tend to look at the college students very high up, and they feel that they are at the bottom in this kind of ladder. So playing together with these games, what it does is like it equalizes the power, and it brings everyone with the same voice at the table. The second time that we go to the school, usually we start designing activities to engage the kids. What my students are asked to do is like they need to design and test these activities before we go to the school. So the first activity that we do to engage the youth was we use all the leftovers from our material library, fabrics, tiles, rugs, and so forth. And the task was to design a headband that represents your community. This particular grant was a grant that was to design and build an installation for a public event that will have 300,000 people, that it was about what does it mean community in the context of living in the desert, right? So these are my students testing their headbands, and these are some of the kids when we went the second time working on their own headbands. Another activity that we did with them was feeling, when you think about the desert in Arizona, the desert is also the lack of water. So we give them an activity that was to fill in the blank. There was another activity that we did that was looking at an ethnographic study with the 4 A's. Basically, we introduced them to the way that industrial designers look at projects, at challenges, looking at first who are the actors, then what are the activities that the actors could be moms, dads, grandpas, the dog, the firefighter, right? Then looking at what are the activities that these actors are performing, then what are the artifacts that the actors will need, and what is the atmosphere. So after they did these ethnographic studies, we asked them that considering what they listed as important things, they need to design an infrastructure that represents their community. And another activity that we did, but this is once we knew where the project was going, was building an audible storm with all of them. So from this project, from doing all these 4 weeks of activities with the kids, something that we discussed is, or we discovered, was that these kids, what they have in common is that they all love the monsoon. And the monsoon, if you don't know, is this kind of dust storm that comes through the desert in Arizona, that at the very beginning is just dust, and then it becomes a storm, right? So this notion was to develop the clouds, the drops, and the windows of the living room, because the kids said, yes, we love the monsoons, but my mom doesn't let me go and play in the rain. Oh, it doesn't let me to play either. So the idea was that this notion of community will be looking at the cloud as all individual pieces that together they create something that is more magnificent, but also representing their notion of the fascination for the monsoon as the clouds, the drops, and the windows of the living room. They also, they are 10-year-olds, so they are not that deep in their thoughts yet, but they want a place to chill, a place to discovery, and a place of belonging. So this is the final rendering of what we were proposing. All the graphics that you see within the installation, it came from the drawings that they produce and from the models that they work. This is my own group of students working on the cloud, right? One of the elements was this cloud of the monsoon. And this is one of the lessons learned for me, is like, while collaboration increases creativity, the fact that it's a design build project and students need to build it full scale sometimes can hinder a little bit of the creativity, right? If you ask me, probably the evolution number 4 of the cloud was the strongest one. Yet, because we need to fabricate it in 4 weeks, we need to simplify a lot of it, right? And you will see exactly the same with the windows of the living room. We propose these benches that they will be the windows. And probably again, number 5 was the closest to from the design point of view. But for example, this was against code because it didn't have the clearance for a cane if a blind person wanted to walk through the space. And we also started looking at these droplets as individual objects that the users in the installation during the festival could interact. So as we move forward, these are some of the examples of how the headbands of the kids became the graphics from the projects. And another example, this is an example of, those are the headbands. That's the example of the models for the infrastructure that they were developing after their design of their 4As. This is the exhibit at the end. You have the cloud that is interactive. It has Arduino sensors, and I will show you in a second. But basically, this cloud curated perspectives of the kids. And at the same time, it was interactive because you would walk and lightnings would come as if it were lighting from the storm. And then the windows of the living room, that was a place to support and comment and develop community, while the drops were these individual installations for the public to test, right? So this one, for example, is a hopscotch that you will jump or skip in every single one of the squares, and it will create like an electric ripple. These chairs that you see over here, you will have 2 people sitting, and you will push the button in one, and you will develop a thunder on the other person's chair, right? Looking at the unexpected. This is another example of a bubble machine that you would jump on one side, and your jumping will be creating air that eventually will be creating drops on the bubble machine, right? This is part of the cloud with the lights activated because someone passed by, right? So one of the lessons that we learn on collaboration is to control the size of the team and to make it accountable to everyone. This is probably the largest team that I have as a team of 10, plus the 35 in industrial design. So after this, I learned that maybe the teams need to be smaller, no bigger than 7, so everyone in the project becomes accountable. But also, how do you coordinate, all the tools that we need to have on the site? How do we coordinate that everyone in the team knows this puzzle, right? Because the installations usually are built in our school, in the shop, and everything needs to fit in a truck. And then we need to transfer to the site and build within 24 hours. So there needs to be a system that allows everyone in the team to know how all the different parts of the puzzle goes together, from understanding the coding that goes behind the cloud, right? And connecting the wires, to understanding the way that, for example, this box that you see over here, it was a counterweight for the cantilever of this part of the cloud that required to be filling with sand, right? So it's something that we would never put the sand when we're fabricating, but knowing that these were the things that we need to consider. We also learn a lot from our partners from arts, media, and engineering. At the very beginning, for example, instead of having Arduino codes with sensor motions, what we wanted to do was that it would be the public would have to touch the trapezoids of the cloud, and we will complete the circuit with our body because our bodies are conductive of electricity. But then we learned from a professor that if someone was dehydrated, then it wouldn't be enough conductivity to make it happen, right? Coordination for the students do absolutely everything. They work with the ordering the materials, delivering the materials, coordinating with the shop, coordinating with the different groups that we are involved at every given moment. So communication, it's also key, right? And as you can see, the pieces of the cloud calculated all the values from the kids. What I would like to do now is to show you a video so you can have a better understanding of the entire project. Okay. I'm sorry about it. So I'm going to remove the sound, but I'm going to continue talking over so I can re-emphasize the idea. What I will ask you to look at is the engagement on the faces, right? On the kids, on our students, this ability to be creative. We need to first always develop a safe place. This requires also a lot of coordination with the school administrators from the point of view of, bringing college students that are not fingerprinted to work with the kids, getting permission from the parents to allow us to videotape or take photograph of their kids, that eventually this is a video that now is in YouTube, but also we created a book with this project, right? So it requires a lot of logistics behind the scenes that, again, I do kind of all the heavy lifting before the semester starts, and when the semester starts, is in part giving my students the tools to develop their own accountability and responsibility skills, right? So this is the exercise that I talked to you about, working for the infrastructures following the 4A's exercise. That is this exercise that works with ethnographic studies. And again, this ability for the students for the kids to start collaborating between themselves. And the idea is that we also go back every week and we kind of check in with them. We tell them, this is what we hear that you wanted. This is what we hear that you think that is community. This is what we saw that you would like to have in your infrastructure. But also for my students, right, that they are very used in interiors to develop indoor spaces. At the very beginning, it was very hard for them to grasp this idea that being in interiors, they will have to do an installation that it was outdoors. So exposing them to other installations that kind of challenge the status quo of interiors was very important. This is a part of the video where you see at the very beginning, none of my students have ever worked before with power tools. So from something so silly like how do you hold a drill or how do you use a chop saw to learning to code with Arduino, right? This is more of the fabrication process. And again, the funding for this type of project, this particular project, the funding was $20,000. The university has a system that the university will keep 35% of any grants that professors receive. So from the $20,000, you only receive $13,000. And then from there, you need to calculate absolutely every single cost, right? From renting the truck to buying tools that maybe we don't have, from buying the materials, buying originally, for example, the students wanted to print the wood in a graphic company. The printing on the wood, printing the wood would cost almost $7,000. So we have to go with a plan B that was using vinyl cutters and just cutting all the black vinyl only, and then finishing it with colors, painting by hand to have the same appearance that as if we would have printed it in a plotter, the wood itself, right? So this project eventually had 270,000 people visit our installation. It was a festival that the Arizona does every year. They are usually all artists are well-known artists. This is the first time that we were able to compete against artists and basically have the voices of the community being represented and the voices of my students being represented as well, right? So see, that's where you see some of the lighting activating by motion sensors, kids discovering the paddles. And then something that I try to be very conscious aware is like what happens after the installation is over or the exhibit is over. Some of the installations have been in museums, but we always find a place where we can then donate the installations in the long term, because one of my own values is none of the things that we should build or we are building should end in a dumpster, right? That when I was a student, every model that I built, then it would end on the dumpster. So it's trying to find this right cycle where we have someone funding the installation, we build it, the students learn through the process, we engage the community as a means to exposing vulnerable populations to the disciplines of design, having the installation being used for whatever purpose was meant to be, and then donated to someone else. And with that said, I open it to questions.
Милагрос, огромное спасибо за такую приятную, теплую лекцию, наполненную огромным количеством счастливых лиц. Это вот было, мне кажется, особенно приятно смотреть на людей, которые счастливы. И я буду задавать вопросы, и начну с вопроса, какой период был самым лучшим на планете вообще, по вашему мнению? Вот неважно, были люди, не были людей, возможно, динозавры, возможно, какой-то период именно там средневековья, любой. И почему?
Do you think was the happiest one?
Can you repeat? I didn't realize that when I mute my video, I thought that you were hearing Olga's question. So I was still in mute the speaker. Can you repeat it?
Какой период был самым лучшим на планете вообще за всю историю не просто человечества, а истории Земли? То есть это может быть там средневековье, это может быть 10 лет назад, это может быть 2 миллиарда лет назад. Объясните, пожалуйста, и обоснуйте, почему.
What periods we have these type of projects? Would it happen? Can you repeat the question? I am not understanding the question. I'm so sorry.
Это, в принципе, связано с миром, потому что Милагрос говорит очень сильно о... Давайте лучше перейдем тогда к следующему вопросу. Сейчас будем разгоняться постепенно, я к нему приду. Какие сообщества вам кажутся самыми сложными именно для работы и взаимодействия с ними, да, то есть могут быть там подростки, это может быть люди там старшего возраста, там за 70, возможно, какие-то дизайн-сообщества.
That's an excellent question. I think that all vulnerable populations, all vulnerable communities are the most difficult to engage, in part because we need to acknowledge that they are vulnerable, right? And when we talk about vulnerability, we talk about the ones that we can do harm without realizing, right? So when we engage with communities, I usually train the students about the power that we have as designers and how we can be making harm, even though we have the best intentions. So for example, a couple of years ago, we worked with high school kids, and one of my students, it was very well intentioned. She basically came and said, we have great plans for you, right? And it's like, okay, let's revise what we said the next time, that we could have the intention of having great plans to do something with someone else. But when it's portrayed like we have great plans for you, it infers that we know what you need, right? So it's always training the designers in general about this aspect of vulnerability. And when you think about vulnerability, I would say that everyone in the United States, everyone that is not white is vulnerable. Everyone that is younger of 18 is not vulnerable. Anyone that is older than 60 is not vulnerable. People that are incarcerated are not vulnerable. People that are sick are not vulnerable. So it's this notion that goes back hand in hand with empathy, understanding that maybe we have the privilege, right? Because we have 2 legs and 2 arms and we speak the language and et cetera, et cetera. And I said that sometimes I am considered a vulnerable population because I am an immigrant and I am a woman and I'm Latina and all those type of things. So as far as we develop, we have this community engagement hand in hand with empathy. We understand that we have the responsibility for others. Everyone is a vulnerable population. And therefore it's hard to me, it's hard to engage because it's hard not to screw up. It's hard not to always do the right thing, right? So how can we learn about what Black people need versus what young kids need, right? The engagement and to have them super excited in the process, that's the easy part. It's the responsibility that carries with us.
А как вы вообще находите проблематику, над которой вам хотелось бы поработать и создать проект? Как происходит вот именно то, что вы понимаете, вот из этого будет сделан проект очень классный?
So that's an excellent question. Some of them, I have to confess that sometimes it's my own political activist when I am kind of, as a human being, I am upset of racism, right? Then I decide to write a grant that the proposal is going to be about what is culture, right? It's a way of trying to not only to raise a bigger voice that everyone can come to the table and say, look, we may look different, but at the end of the day, we are the same, right? That we are the same, like we are human, right? So sometimes it comes from a reaction of whatever injustice I see in the world. Sometimes it comes from the grantors. The grantors are the people that are funding this project, that they say, hey, can you help us? We want to answer this question. And sometimes it's a kind of a continuation that then comes from the community. So there was one particular grant that we did in 2015, and then we did the second time in 2016. And in 2017, the community came and said, hey, can you look for money? Because now we want you to do this other thing. So the inspirations are always different, but they are there.
Тогда следующий вопрос. А у кого больше вообще идей? У детей или у взрослых?
I would say that children. There is something that is, you know, when you talk to the kids, especially the younger kids, when I have worked with kids between ages 6 and 10, right now we are doing a project when one of the kids proposed that we are building an STEM trailer, right? So it's going to be a movable classroom that can move from one school to the other one. And one of the kids proposed that it should have a drone airport on top, so they could send messages from school to school by drone instead of by email. And I found the idea super fascinating. And I have a kid a couple of years ago, we were redesigning a school after a shooting, and the kid suggested that instead of walking from classroom to classroom in the hallway, that there should be a system of zip lines that you would travel through the zip line. So what happens is, because they don't know all the rules and they are not concerned about safety, they tend to be much more creative than the adults. And that's part of the fascinating thing with working with the kids. With working with adults, the adults are most of the time first focusing safety. If it is safety to cross the street, if it is because there is not a traffic light, they get so fixated in their first concern that they cannot go past that and be creative. So at the very beginning, what I do, I don't know if you're familiar with the pyramid of Maslow. Maslow was a psychologist that basically said that we have needs as human beings. And this thing, like if we cannot pass this one, then we cannot go to the next level. So I always focus and tell them, okay, assume that the level of safety is covered, right? Assume that it's not a concern, that is addressed. Then what else can it be? But we have to re-educate the adults to kind of assume that all their safety concerns will be taken care of in order to be creative.
А с какими проблемами вы вообще сталкиваетесь при работе в коллаборации? Какие есть подводные камни?
That's an excellent question. I think that one is having everyone sharing the equal responsibility in the project is probably the most important. The second one is that there will always be things that we didn't plan that they will happen or that we are required. For example, last spring, we were fabricating in the shop when COVID hit, right? And they told us, okay, you need to leave. There was a project that it was an installation for a museum, and the fire marshal came from the firefighter house and say, this fabric that you have over here is not fire retardant, right? And we're like, okay, but this is like any other installation. Not one single piece of painting, right, is fire retardant. So sometimes it's also educating the people that enforce codes and regulations about how to look at these temporary installations versus the ones that they are permanent. We have done both, the ones that are permanent, that yes, it's everything up to code, but when it's a temporary, then it fits under the category of temporary, and therefore it can be not fire retardant. So sometimes it's educating the public, sometimes it's bringing accountability and responsibility among my students, because it's much more intensive work than a regular studio. And sometimes it's just being very well organized because you are jiggling with 10,000 things at the same time. from what the papers that you need to submit to the agency that is giving you the funds, to the paperwork that you need to submit to the university. So if a student comes themselves, chop their finger, they are covered to the insurance, to the paper that you need to photograph working with the kids. So it requires a lot of logistics in that regard.
Ваша вообще деятельность связана с огромным количеством бюрократических вопросов, подписание бумаг, взятие разрешений, допуски, та же самая вот история про эту ткань. Как вы вообще к ним относитесь и как вообще начать к этому относиться лояльно и не сойти с ума?
Welcome to America. I think that in part, yes, there is a lot of bureaucracy. Let me put you in perspective. When I was a student, in Argentina, we will go and build in poor neighborhoods homes. So I learned to lay a wall and I learned to do absolutely everything while I was a student. But in Argentina, the legal system is not as efficient as in the US. In the US, there is bureaucracy because everything can become a lawsuit, right? So as the moment that I learned that that's the process, then I have that part of the process streamlined. To me, the part that keeps me, I always say that these type of projects are like childbirth. It's very painful, but you forget, and the joy is so much that then you have another child. It's more or less the same thing. You see I see how much my students grow in the semester, right? I see how they develop this sense that they can do it, right? The sense of pride, the sense of I made this, right? And then they are usually, when they finish with this course, because all the other courses are like the studios that we all do, right? That where the students are designing in the screen or in a model, and it's very virtual, right? There is no gravity, there is no thickness, there is not a joinery. So very often what happens is like immediately after the studio is done, all my students have jobs because architects come and saw what they produce. And it's like, okay, who did this? I want to hire the person that did this. And then the other one is knowing the impact that we are doing in these kids or we are doing in these communities, right? These are people that they were never exposed to design, and knowing you feel the expectation each time that you arrive, that they're all happy to see you. When I arrive with my students and we say, okay, we're going to do the activities of the day, they're all super excited to be working with design students rather than with any other thing. But that's what keeps me happy and doing it, even though sometimes bureaucracy is painful.
Супер. А как вот вернемся к вашим проектам, вот как вы считаете, они локальные или их можно масштабировать и там в другие страны, чтобы они были, например, в России? Да? Возможно ли вообще такое, чтобы такие проекты появились в других странах?
That's an excellent question. In fact, right now, I am doing the first project in Venezuela. I am working with 3 professors from the School of Architecture in Venezuela. We are in month 5. So the first 2 months, I taught them how to engage communities. So the things like, okay, how do you go and work with someone that is a vulnerable population, what you can say, what you cannot say, how do you develop trust, how do you encourage them to think creatively and so forth. I got a grant, I got funding. And basically the way that I see this project is like, I am Santa Claus because I got the money and then I'm sending the money to Venezuela and they will start building their installation within the next 3 weeks. So I will tell you, their project is a little bit longer than the ones that I show, from the point of view that the ones that I show you are 12 weeks and the project in Venezuela is 1 year long. So the idea is that eventually if this one works, the idea is to start working with going after other fundings to do the same with other countries. To me, the way that I look at education and the way that I look at communities is this notion of empowerment. There is a saying that says, give a man a fish and you feed them for a day, teach them how to fish and you feed them for life. So to me, is this notion of teaching others how to fish, teaching my students how to fish, teaching the community how to fish. And eventually now I reach a point and an expertise that I can scale it out internationally.
А люди каких профессий вообще задействованы в ваших проектах? Это же не просто там дизайнеры или педагоги, наверняка есть еще какая-то сеть людей из смежных и не обязательно смежных профессий.
Well, I have had anything that you can imagine. I have worked with churches. I have worked with teachers. We have worked with, there was a project that we did that is called Freedom by Design. That is basically how do we liberate people through design. A level 1 is to change the doorknobs of the doors for people with arthritis, for door handles. And we did a level 4 that was making public spaces accessible for people in wheelchairs. And for that particular project, the call was like, if you are in any sort of wheels, come and join us. So we have people in wheelchairs, we have mothers with strollers, we have a lady who had knee replacement and she had this scooter. And basically we work with them about how the public space within a building would be much more inclusive of that particular population. So it all depends. And that's one of the fascinating things. It's like I have worked with judges and policemen and people that works in jails of younger kids, of juvenile, all the way to 3 years old, all the way to doctors and anything in between.
Милагрос, а без каких навыков вообще невозможно быть задействованной в ваших проектах? Вот если у тебя этого нет, то ты проект не сделаешь. Вот скажите, есть ли такое?
The first one is, I think that is being accountable to your own team of design students, accountable to the community that you are working with, and accountable to the grant funders, right? The people that is giving us the money. So probably accountability would be the first one to me. The second one that goes hand in hand is collaboration, communication, and empathy, right? It's this understanding that we are designing with someone else. We are just the ones representing their values and aspirations. How do we collaborate with the community and how we collaborate among themselves? And how we communicate, right? There are moments, I'm not gonna lie, it's not everything flowers, right? There is a moment, especially when you are in 3 weeks of fabrication and you have 1 week left, everyone is very stressed, right? So being able to communicate without being emotional, right? It's saying this needs to be done because if you don't do this, then I cannot do this other thing. It's super important. And then it's funny because at the end of the day, the hard skills, I'm not worried about it because I can teach you the hard skills. It's much easier to teach you how to use Revit or how to use a chop saw than to teach you how to be a good human being. So it goes back to this notion of the soft skills that the employers are looking at. And the other thing, one more that is very important to me is this notion of risk-taking, right? The moment that you are taking this course, you know that you are taking a lot of risks because unlike all the other studios, if you don't design something well, worst case scenario, you have a bad grade. But in this studio, if you don't design something well, you are impacting someone else, right? So this ability to be able to take risk and to take responsibility for the risks that you are taking is super important.
Милагрос, а бывало ли такое, что вы придумали идею, проект, начали исследовать вопрос, и все оказалось вообще не так, как вы рассчитывали? Что вы делаете в таких ситуациях? И вообще бывало ли такое с вами?
Yes, I have one of those ones. We work with a high school that in the United States, there is 6 million kids between the ages of 14 and 18 that they are neither at work nor at school. So this organization, what it does is like, you can imagine that these kids are about to get in trouble, right? To get in gangs or to get in drugs or whatever it is. They are dropouts from high school. So the organization reached out to us and say, can you work with these kids? And when we start working with our students, like we always call the nice installations, and I didn't show you one of the nicest. There are some that are much more nicer. I show you that one because it's probably the most complex. But among the students, they say, oh, we want to be star architects, right? This kind of the star and the architect. So it's all about, very often, these installations could be about them and the aesthetics of architecture. And the students that were working with this particular group of youth wanted to do an installation that would be awarded, that it would be super beautiful. And then by working with them, 4 weeks into the semester, they came and told me, Milagros, we don't want to be an installation that will satisfy us. This is not what they need. What they need is a process. What they need is a constant in their life. So the students propose a project that instead of being a full-scale installation that was supposed to be 20 feet by 40 feet, in meters would be more or less like 7 meters by 12 meters. They shift the approach and they design a bench, that the bench represented the hopes of these kids, right? So the project was designing hope. And this bench have, from all the information that we gathered from the kids, they kind of explain what were the most fundamental pillars in their lives. And the bench represented all those pillars. And then what they did is like, part of the design was that they will have paracord. That is, I don't know if you, Elena, you know the translation of paracord. Paracord is like a rope. It's a brand of a rope. That they will whip that rope in between the pillars of the bench, with the idea that every year they will be building these benches, and by the time that they graduate from high school, they will cut the rope and they would use it for the graduation ceremony. So there was this notion of being mentor and being a mentee, that the idea of if you stay, there is something that you can be part every year. And at the same time, the students learn to weld, to pour foundations with concrete, to use the wood chop machines. So there was all these other things that we were able to do because we shift the project completely. And that's why at the very beginning I say they feel like a blind leading a blind. It's because I go with zero expectations the first day of class when we start working with the communities. And for the students, sometimes it's like, okay, but I want to start designing now. And it's like, no, we need to trust the process of where will it come. But yeah, it has changed quite a bit.
Милагро, скажите, а как изменились вообще ваши проекты за последние 2 года? Понятное дело, что коронавирус, он привлек внимание к здоровью, да, там, к социальной ответственности, но есть же сферы, которые немножечко просели, которые тоже очень важны. Вот расскажите об этом, пожалуйста.
Well, my life super changed because I moved in December to another state, another city, another university. And I am no longer teaching the trailer that we are doing right now, the STEM classroom that is going to be moving. I got the grant, but because now I am the director of the school, I can no longer be spending 12 hours a week with the students. So I gave the funding to one of my colleagues. So my personal life has changed to the point that I'm not teaching these studios because I am in an administrator position right now. Said that, how it changed because of COVID was a moment for me to reflect and explore how I can scale out. And that's why now we are doing the pilot study with Venezuela. It was a moment of, because we wouldn't be able to be building, it wouldn't be safe for our students or for the community or engage in the community. It was more about, okay, how can I share what I learned, all my hiccups and failures and successes with other professors so we can start doing the same in another parts of the world. So, and one of these reflections was writing a chapter in a book that is about design builds in design education.
Вторая часть вопроса. то, что эпоха коронавируса, она привлекла внимание к определенной части, к к здоровью, социальной ответственности. Но как вы считаете, есть ли сферы, которые просели из-за того, что стало очень много внимания именно к вещам, которые касаются коронавируса?
All your questions are amazing. That one is a hard one. Yes, I think that, we are human beings. As part of human needs, we have the need to be surrounded by other humans and to be engaged with others. But to me, it's about this, at the end of the day, the public good, what is the best for the greater society other than for my own need. So to me, when it was time to go in the United States in lockdown as a means, before the vaccine came and so forth, as a means to protect everyone, I understood that it was the case, right? When I know I am vaccinated and I know that I could be safe, but maybe I can be carrying something that I cannot make someone else safe, is again going to this notion of who is my vulnerable population. I go back to the very beginning of understanding how we may be doing unintentionally harm. And to me, then it's a matter of how do we become creative. So one of the ways that I became more creative and through COVID, trying to build communities, because at the end of the day, all my research is about community building, is through different platforms. There is a platform that is called Menti. I don't know if you have heard of it. I work a lot with Menti to build community with my students, with community stakeholders, with people that I have worked in the past. And I leverage Zoom as a means to also use this time during COVID to share what I was doing with potential future partners, right? So it's a tricky question. At the end of the day, to me, it's like, if it is for the greater good, then I'm okay with it. And let's see what else we can do to build community.
Милагра, скажите, а вы чаще работаете частными заказчиками или с государством? И какие вообще есть различия между вот этими двумя типами заказчиков?
So when I am a registered architect in Argentina I have done both. I have worked for private clients and I have worked for state or national clients. My biggest project in Argentina was designing a hospital. And that was kind of my biggest baby of all. In the US, I only practice as an academic. I don't practice as an architect, in part because there is not validation of my license in Argentina as an architect in the US, so that I have worked as an employee in a firm with private clients, and I have worked with state clients. And probably the biggest difference is the transparency in the budget and the transparency in the decision-making process. Working with the state agencies usually requires a lot more bureaucracy. Said that, all the work that I do with my students is just my students and I fabricating. We don't engage with contractors or with, it's just us, the raw materials, the shop, and fabricating. That at some point empowers the students to understand the process from the very beginning, from ideation all the way to fabrication. So they get an experience that most of the time they don't get in design education in the US.
Давайте представим ситуацию. Вы создаете проект для городского пространства, в котором участвуют и дети, и взрослые, и пенсионеры, и государство тоже такое, типа, тоже готово в это включиться. Как выбрать людей в команду, если нужно набрать всего 10 человек? Как вы будете как бы отбирать?
Right. So when I talk about the team of 7, probably to avoid conflict, is with my own students. Then the community at large, it can be 500 and I'm totally fine. The more the merrier. It's just with the ones that we work. So we have worked in a case that, I don't know if you're familiar with the WELL standards. It's like the LEED certification, but now the LEED certification or the LEED standards is about how the building impacts the environment. The WELL standards is new, it's only 5 years old, and it's how the building impacts humans. And we were working with the WELL certification to build these blocks to success, and we were working with 200 kids, and I have 35 students. And what I did is like I broke the 35 students in teams of 7. I have 5 teams of 7. And I told them, the project is gonna be called Building Blocks to Success. So, and then I gave them parameters. Every block is gonna, like the blocks of the Legos, the blocks that we play. Because we have 5 teams, we have 5 different categories, right? And we define what is success. So one was about living well, the other one was about healing well, the other one was about building community and culture, and so forth. And then basically I gave them parameters to the students and say, okay, every single one of these blocks will have to fit in a cube that is going to be 12 feet by 12 feet by 12 feet, 4 meters by 4 meters by 4 meters. And then we will put all these cubes together and the installation will be the 5 cubes. But each team needs to build one as a means, again, to control the size of the team, designing and building. And each particular team was assigned to one particular classroom in a school. So they were working with 30 kids. So one block, 7 interior design students, 30 kids. Another block, 7 interior design students, 30 kids, and so forth. Those are all great questions.
Следующий вопрос. Вот у вас был проект, связанный с детской площадкой. Вы там использовали экоматериалы, скорее всего, дерево. Вот, но дерево имеет свойство портиться. Вот как вы в дальнейшем поддерживаете проект и вообще следите за ними, вот, за их качеством?
Right. So in that particular project, it was not good. It was HPD. It's a high composite plastic that it was a leftover. It was a donation of material. It was the only project that we have the materials before we have the client, the project, the design, or anything. So it's the way that it's the material that is used in the United States to build playgrounds in public parks. And there was a company that was moving headquarters, and they came and said, hey, I know that you build, would you like to have this donation? So in that particular project, we work with that material that is not sustainable certified, but the way that I look at it is like, if I wouldn't have used it, it would have ended in the dumpster because it was already produced and they were moving and they were planning in just getting rid of it. And that particular material has the look of a wood, but it's plastic. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It can get hot in the summer, especially in Arizona. Arizona, we have 6 months of the year with 42 degrees. And that's why we place it in such a way that, I don't know if you remember, but there were trees and we were trying to provide shade during the entire day to make sure that at any given moment the kids will get burned.
Милагрос, у нас остается 10 минут. Это последние 2 вопроса, и будем с вами заканчивать. Итак, чтобы стать дизайнером интерьеров, какими навыками нужно обязательно обладать?
I think that at the end of the day, the biggest skill is empathy, right? I didn't mention this, but I have a master in urban planning, I have a master in environmental planning, I have a master in architecture, undergrad in architecture, and then another undergrad in habitat design. And because I can move from the scale of the bottle all the way to the scale of the city, I understand the responsibility of the disciplines very well. And the way that I look at it is like, if landscape architecture and urban design has the responsibility with the larger ecosystems, flora, fauna, water, if architecture has the responsibility with the urban fabric, to me, as an interior designer and an interior architect have the responsibility with the scale of the body, the mind, and the well-being, right, and the scale of the body. And I define that as interiority. That concept came from a professor in Australia a few years ago, but I believe that the first skill that we need is empathy. The second one is, I think that is learning to communicate with others and educate others in a moment of, I don't know what's the channel in Russia, but in the United States it's HGTV, this kind of TV reality shows that people come and really model your home and it's all pretty. And there is this kind of sometimes perception of the overall public that what we do is make up in the walls, right? It's the thing like we just make it look pretty. And to me, a good interior designer is someone that understands color theory and understands what the color is making to your body without you realizing, understands safety, right? Understand, again, there is an international building code that regulates how many people can be in the room, how wide the hallway should be, right? So being responsible with understanding that at the end of the day, we are designing lives of humans and how humans are going to interact is super important. And then this ability to be curious and self-learner, right? There is this notion like sometimes the students are like, oh, we want to learn this software. If the class is about only the software and we don't cover the bigger questions, then it's a disservice to the student because eventually the software will change, like AutoCAD, that no one else uses AutoCAD right now. So it's about being curious enough to be self-taught with softwares and being curious enough to see how you can integrate what you learn as theory into the practice, right? Into the practice, what I call as practice. So ability to synthesize, ability to learn because you want to be better and not because you need a grade or because the professor is telling you, empathy, communicate with others, and the responsibility of shaping the lives of others.
А где кончается архитектор и начинается дизайнер интерьеров?
Well, I don't see the boundary because I both, and I come up very clearly. In the US, I think the boundary is that in architecture, the way that is being taught in the US, most of the time is about form and proportion. And no one is thinking how a human is going to feel within the space, right? When no one is thinking about the reverberation of the sound when the house is all glass. That in interiors, we are thinking about comfort and we are thinking about if the space is going to feel too cold. And we are thinking if the heels of a lady, you know, the shoes are going to be a nuisance to the rest of the environment. So I think that it's more about one that is more human-centered focus, that it would be interiors, and the other one that is more about object focus.
Мелагрос. И последний вопрос. Посоветуйте, пожалуйста, какие-нибудь журналы, книги или, возможно, просто людей, на которых можно подписаться в Инстаграме, которые послужат для наших слушателей вдохновением.
Yes, definitely. I can provide the list, or I can start telling you some out of my head right now. Either way, Elena, whatever you prefer. I would suggest that you look at the work
Можно
of
и
Shashi Khan.
так сделать. Одно другому не мешает.
Yeah, I can do that. But I would suggest to look at Shashi Khan. I would suggest to look at Shashi Khan used to work for Perkins and Wills, and now she's by herself. Joe Ishimoda. Joe Ishimoda is one of the only 10 fellows in both architecture and in interiors. I would suggest that you look at Snøhetta. If you look at the film Snøhetta, they have more interior architects than architects, right? And it talks about the type of work that they do in their office. I personally went a couple of years ago to Norway. I told my husband, we need to go because it's part of my job, it's my homework, right? Looking at this project that it was about how they were doing adaptive reuse in Norway, that is super fascinating. I can put together a list, and the list is always growing, right? The good designers and the good thinkers, probably reading the paper on interiority from Perolini. She's the one that defined interiority a few years ago. I think that it will be very successful. There is a book from Greg Marinick that is called The Interior Architecture Reader, that is theory on interior architecture that is pretty strong. Yeah, and it's a combination. Most of the books that I read, besides the one of the discipline, most of the ones that changed me as a person, as an educator, and it helps me to be better, they are not design related, but I kind of transfer the concepts into design education. And I enjoy those type of books too.
Милагрос, огромное спасибо за прекрасную, теплую.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. And I'm sorry for the technical glitches. I am amazed by the questions of the students, so please congratulate them on my behalf.
Супер. Ну что, друзья, будем с вами заканчивать. Спасибо всем участникам лекции. Будем рады видеть вас на других вебинарах школы «Среда обучения» и на встречах вне границ. А еще также напоминаем, что у нас прямо сейчас идет набор на программу бакалавриата и дополнительного профессионального образования по направлению декорирования, дизайна интерьеров. Всю подробную информацию можно узнать у нас на сайте или при беседе со специалистом приемной комиссии. До скорых встреч. Будем рады видеть вас на встречах вне границ и среди наших студентов в среде обучения. Всем пока!